All right, Tati, as promised, I'm going to try to riff on this real quick and then pass it to you to respond. So Rick Rubin, in his conversation with Jack Clark, when he was describing, and as a non-technical person, the difference between the historical SaaS kind of model, which is deterministic software design, versus probabilistic software design, which is LLM native, he used this wonderful analogy and parallel to a wrench. And he said, look, if I have a wrench, I know, that when that wrench is in my garage and I take it off the wall, to turn a bolt and tighten it, I do that. I put the wrench back. It stays right there. It only is used. It's waiting for a human being to come along and use it. And he said, but these LLMs and the AI enabled software, it's more of an everything tool, meaning it is probabilistic by design because the intelligence is baked inside of the actual software. So the software itself has agency to an extent, meaning it can think, it can interpret. And if you enable it, a la, here comes the enterprise AI agent universe, you can give it arms and legs. So like you have a brain that you put in a jar today, now it's being put inside of a body. And going to Karpathy, he talked about Iron Man suits versus Iron Man robots, right? So we've invented this brain that has intelligence, and we're stepping into the arena pretty soon here. Some are further along than others, where we're saying, hey, what happens if we give what used to be deterministic software, which is the wrench on the wall waiting for the human to grab it and use it and put it back? What if we give it intelligence and therefore agency by enabling it with agentic workflows where they can actually achieve things? And so Rick kind of said, this is like an everything tool. It's a little overwhelming. I don't necessarily know where to go with it. There's so many different things it can do. And I think to your point, Tati, earlier before we started this recording, maybe there are some parallels to the way you have perceived people thinking about this, which is, are they thinking big enough? And is deterministic software, meaning traditional SaaS, is it embracing this new intelligence that can be infused into the existing software? Or is that quite challenging to really make a reality? When you start thinking about the LLM-native, apps and software that is probabilistic by nature and by design from the jump. And so that's a lot of word salady jargon, a little bit of jazz hands here. But I want to give you the opportunity as the nerd in this conversation to be able to kind of respond to that, because I think there's a whole lot of signal and light bulbs to go on for the audience as you start to think about deterministic versus probabilistic, a wrench versus, an intelligent, apparatus that can kind of think on its own and potentially act with some degree of autonomy and agency.
Thank you for sharing that. We were talking earlier, and I think that there's so much to unpack there, because to me, this gap that exists today between these AI washed features and the AI native systems is where most companies are getting stuck, and most leaders are stuck. Is novelty instead of utility, right? So you're looking at those two things separately. And we were talking earlier about an example, which was, when your cell phone came around, it wasn't about adding swipe effects. Or cooler emojis. That was not what. So yes, can you do that? Sure. Is it fun? Yeah, absolutely. I love new emojis. But the truth is that is not, AI is not about adding a chat assistant. It's really about rethinking. And again, as I always drawing these lines to operations, whether it's retailers or any other business, really. I wouldn't even say consumer-centric business, any other business. What your product does, how users are interacting with it, and how intelligence flows through it. You have to rethink all of that, because it's not about, we saw the deployment years ago, and we talked about this in one of the prior episodes about how chatbots were all about like doing the exact same poor job as some of these real people were doing. They were not set up for success in these in these customer service processes. And then we put a chatbot instead of a person that was doing the same thing. It was just upsetting people further because they didn't know as many things or they couldn't respond the same way. So it really is about rethinking. And when I think when I think about rethinking, the one example I always go to in my mind, and I think it's so fitting right now with the way we're looking at how companies and how leaders are interacting with this, is the famous Guy Kawasaki example. I don't even know how many years ago he gave this example about telling the story about how when the refrigerator was invented, folks were needing more refrigerations for various things. And but the beginning of that, before the refrigerator was invented, was that they were just making the pioneers of that were making bigger ice trucks. Oh, we need more ice, right? Because we need more refrigeration, therefore we need bigger ice trucks. So they build these big ice trucks, and you had entire companies that their livelihood was ice trucks and ice and making ice. And so there's a lot of folks right now buying ice and making bigger trucks and trying to figure it out the garage to put the bigger trucks. I mean, we can keep, pulling that thread all we want, but ultimately this is a refrigerator. It's not the ice truck. So how it is a different, and I think that's the part when we talk about you can't do it alone. One of the things we say it all the time: you can do more than you think. You can't do it alone, right? I say this about Aurora all the time. But the key for me to this is that you have to have, because you won't necessarily know without having the right people by your side that are looking at this, they're advising you. You don't know what it can do, and you don't know what it will do. And you have to look at your processes with a different mindset that you probably don't have. We're not asking for people, it's impossible without exposure to this to be thinking this way immediately, automatically. It's not how this works. You can't read a book about it, or you can't go to a seminar, you can't go to a conference and come back and just know how to do this. It will require the complete rework of that. And I just think that the all of this and the design, and I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of the UI kind of being the product now as well.
Yeah, I mean, so Karpathy really landed the plane for me. His presentation, which is only, I think, 37 or 39 minutes, and it's absolutely worth watching. And it's a little bit, on the technical side of things when he's presenting to Y Combinator. But I think what he essentially outlined, amongst other things, is that we're stepping into, and we are now in the software, 3.0 era. And what that means is, and taking his words, I'm probably paraphrasing a bit here, but a lot of software is going to be rewritten. A lot of software is going to be written. Mm-hmm. There's multiple different ways to think about software now. So again, going back to deterministic versus probabilistic, not every piece of software needs to have any form of intelligence baked into it. Simultaneously, when you think about some of these examples and opportunities, from a domain expertise perspective, for example, when you start thinking about a 10,000 person, organization, for example, and let's just say, within the context of that business, there's 100 to 300 different concepts that are easy for us to talk about as human beings, but really difficult to represent inside of traditional infrastructure, like a spreadsheet, for example. That stuff is referred to as ontology, right? Which steps into knowledge graph, which steps into, if you enable an intelligent application, an LLM enabled piece of software, to understand how the top 10 to 15 most important workflows associate with how the value creates, or the business creates the most value, the most important value dimensions in value chain, and you identify and isolate proprietary data sets and intellectual property that can then teach that LLM very quickly to better understand what's happening in real time, the interface question becomes extremely important, right? Mm-hmm. Because now all of a sudden your superstars are becoming enabled by a tool that we've never previously had access to and ever really understood. And I called it a tool, which I always say don't call it a tool. But in this instance, I think it's helpful to think of it as a tool because at the end of the day, jobs are just bundles of tasks. And if you can introduce into this human and machine, collaboration, feedback loop, tools that are profoundly different than those that we've had before, I think there is a really difficult but really important question that executives within these centers of excellence or otherwise within, to your point, the AI ecosystem of a company, where you really have to think about, are we enabling LLMs to do what they do best without constraints that could prevent them from enabling us to take those next steps? But also, do we have appropriate guardrails to also mitigate risk associated with things that we understand and also those that we don't? Because this stuff is so new, it's changing so fast. But I really do think the as Karpathy said, if AI is the generator and the human beings are the validator, you just want to be super cognizant of that autonomy, slider, and make sure that folks are being empowered to use these, LLM enabled systems appropriately, but also not just reinventing or throwing ice all over all these other deterministic softwares that might in their own right just be good enough for the time being,
A couple of things come to mind, and I think that's a great piece to dig into. But it has to, that UX, because it really is the UX is that boundary that's between the alien and the human, right? We're talking about the LLMs being the aliens, and it has to be able to handle a few things. It has to be able to handle verification. Can I trust this? Escalation. What if this fails? What is the safeguard? What is the fallback plan? And then continuity. Obviously, all of those pieces need to be thought of. But one of the things, and I just want to go back to one of the things I get the most excited about is exactly what you're describing in terms of operations, in terms of finding those processes that are the most valuable, that are the ones that are driving the most value, because famously as a operations leader, that's one of the things, or whatever area that you're leading, whether you're leading finance, whether you're leading operations, any business unit that you're leading, one of the main things is how do you keep focus on what matters? How do you keep your teams and keep everyone's focus on the things that bring the most value, both short term, long term? How do you play? And that's what a leader does, right? Sort of playing that, towing that line of where are the things you got to feed for longer term and shorter term, etc. And one of the things I get most excited about is that we know, and again, goes back to the prior conversation, and this is not here to do the same things we do faster and better. This is here to help us figure out what we're not doing, where are the misses, where are the gaps. So what I get most excited about, because I see, and in every single one of my roles, I've had so many opportunities to break these processes and rethink them. And this will help me scale that. And this helps me scale that because now I'm doing this and it's really helping me rethink. And it's even telling me that some of those processes are obsolete. And by the way, I'm missing 3 other processes over here and there's too much time spent on this. So it becomes this, I often refer to as a thought partner in operating. Which again is the same analogy as a co-pilot and in all of those things that we've been saying, but whatever analogy works for whoever's listening to us, like that's what it needs to be, because that's where that magic lies, where it does something that you haven't done. Because we all, again, as leaders, you all know you have flaws in your process. We all know that you have things that are patched together, that you have things that could be better. You don't necessarily know how to fix that. So that's one of the things, and another door that opens that we talked about so many times is the modularity. You can really go with precision, and that's another analogy to think about a surgery, right? Super precise surgeon that's going in and removing a tumor, let's say, and it's going in and it's so precise and so specific. There's an exact location, and it solves that problem at that moment. And that's the way you're thinking about. I don't want to equate that to bad health problems, but it's again, whatever helps you think about how that comes together, that's how I think about it. Like the modularity is an absolute gift, and it's an absolute gift for a moment in time where things are changing so fast that if it wasn't our prior episode, we talked about how, if your teams are still talking about 24-month plans or even 12-month plans, they're seriously out of sync with reality. If a vendor comes selling you something that's a 24-month plan, run in regards to AI, because it's not good. But I really think about this as a gift for this iteration, for this moment of continuing to grow, and also the ability to have an investment that you can still create, you can still do all of this. Again, talking about AI native systems, you're talking about, the older operator head goes to a place of, oh my God, this is cost is gonna, is a 18-month approval period, and it's my entire budget for the next 5 years. It's not. It doesn't have to be. It's not today already. You can do this, and you can implement this modularity, and you can get these things done. You can test them, and you can see these results in front of you in weeks, not months. So, anyways, I get very
Yeah.
excited about this.
No, I love it. And I'm gonna build on that and go into one of my favorite territories, right? So process mining and process intelligence meets, you can call it a knowledge graph, you can call it a digital twin, what have you. One of the territories that I think is extraordinarily interesting for folks like us is when you think about the way a business of any size operates, kind of going back to some of the stuff we've talked about regarding ontology and, 100 to 200, 300, concepts or logic that, it essentially represents the value chain of a business. At the end of the day, it's what you just mentioned right there, Tati, is like everybody's got gaps in their process. Everybody's trying to improve their process. Some of it's strong, some of it's weak, some of it's this, some of it's that. But there are companies, that are out there. Celonis comes to mind as the pioneer and leader in this space, but they effectively enable you to take an MRI in real time and on an ongoing basis of your business and how it operates, literally the process that unfolds at scale. And now when you introduce into a Celonis enabled environment, and they've got digital twins, they've got process graph technology, if you introduce the genius, right, the LLM, into that environment where it's got this extraordinary capacity and encyclopedic, memory, et cetera, to then analyze the data sets associated with all the data exhaust that comes off the back of the way your 10, 20, 40, 100,000 people do what they do. Think about the implications for the way that the LLM enabled software, in this case Celonis, can help you, the business leader, better understand where are my gaps and what should I do about it, which steps into, predictive and prescriptive intelligence and all these other things in analytics. And so, going back all the way to what you had said on the previous video and alluded to here is it's probably a good idea to think about this intelligence as alien, not alien bad, alien good, alien different, because there's no amount of human beings that could do what I just described in relation to what Celonis does and how it enables and process mining companies of that orbit. And the implications for superstars and teams just more broadly are staggering. And I think that's I'll just kind of leave it there, but love to hear you react to that, Tati. But like, that's why I get so geeked out about process mining, digital twins, knowledge graph, and LLM enabled software that kind of brings all that stuff together. Celonis being a fantastic example.
Well, because it's what we say. The mic drop there is that's what will enable your teams and your, often talking about, oh, there's not enough time to do the strategic pieces. There's not enough time to work on innovation. There's not enough time. There's not enough labor. There's not enough. This is what can create that opportunity for us, because then when we often talk about like that, moving this, what can be done by these LLMs, what can be done by AI to that, and becoming, again, holding its hand, right? Again, thought partner, co-pilot, whatever you want to call it. but then you're freeing up for the things that you then need to be the partner and you need to be offering to bring into that equation, and the thinking that you need to have around it, and the nuance on logic and on in the way that we perceive things, and that the gut, right, the gut feelings, which leaders are, the best leaders out there have phenomenal way to harness that, and they just know, right, they just know all of that. Then you become you plug in an amplifier to that, but you also give it time, and you give it place to a place to exist and a place to grow, and you give it at the end a partner that will also help amplify all of that. So I geek out on that part, because I just find that so much of what we do is not, and truthfully, it's inefficient in terms of process. So when you talk about process mining and digital twins and all these things that make that, efficiency might be one of my favorite words in the whole world, because it is. Yeah, that's my flavor of geek, right? So efficient in doing things in a way that is the most optimized, the best, and that's where these things can really help us figure that out. And without all of our blind spots, without all of our biases, yes, you're gonna tell me, oh, there has some biases there too. We can fix them. We can figure that out. We can challenge them. We can, in a way, again, is not humans, in a way that is not the same that we've done with humans. So again, I think that there's a unique opportunity that companies have at this moment in time, even before they rethink the entire operation, to start playing with this. And by playing, I mean playing in a good way, just like we meant alien in a good way, that you start, with the modularity, you start with some of the smaller pieces, because that, again, I cannot emphasize this enough, by putting those little pieces together is what's going to help you figure out the whole puzzle. You don't, how do you do a puzzle? You go piece by piece, right? And you maybe start on a little corner. Some people have different techniques, but you doing it. And this is the exact same way. If you're trying to sit at table and discuss how you put together the entire puzzle in a blink of an eye, it's not going to work. You gotta be tinkering with it. You gotta deploy some modular solutions. You gotta find those holes in your process. You gotta find out that you might be missing some pretty important processes, or that you're spending time, energy, and money on things that don't matter that much, or that are in fact doing the opposite. Because a lot of the processes in my career that I faced were there, and they're making things more difficult than if they didn't exist. So it wasn't even like, oh, well, this doesn't help. No, it actually stands in the way. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
that we can solve with this. So I'll leave it at that for food for thought. But we're always here to chat about this with anyone who wants to pick it up with us.
100%. And I'm going to leave it there with the tinkering word. That is a very important word. We should all be tinkering with this, hands in dirt, versus, as you said, kind of looking at it, talking about it. You got to tinker with it, because it's a different beast. So thanks, Tati. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Likewise. See you soon.